Okay, band pick of the week for Monday is Phoebe Bridgers. Anybody know Phoebe Bridgers? Somebody? No? No, you guys don't listen to rock and roll, I guess. Anyway, she's 26 years old. She's a guitarist, lead singer. She's just got a new album out called Punisher. So you might want to just Google or get on Spotify or Pandora and listen to a tune or two by Phoebe Bridgers, and so you'll be up to speed on what's happening in the rock and roll industry. All right. So last time we were talking about economic profit, right? And why we want to have economic profit. What does it do? And what is it, right? And we said that economic profit is total revenue minus total cost, but you include all the opportunity costs. So again, when you take Econ 202, they're going to say, hey, firms make zero economic profit in a competitive industry. That doesn't mean that they're not making any money. What it means is they're making just as much with those resources as they could have in any other industry. So if you have a firm that's making positive economic profit, and again we use pi to be economic profit, if that's greater than zero, what's going to happen? You're going to attract new firms, right? They're going to say, oh, that's a interesting way to do it. These guys are making more with their resources than I'm making in the alternative, right? And so I'm going to move into that industry, or at least some folks are going to move into that industry. And when they do, we said that supply, right? Because supply is the market supply is the sum of the individual supply curves. Supply shifts right, and what happens? Price is going to fall, quantity is going to go up, and that'll keep happening until profit gets to zero. So that's why we say that in a perfectly competitive market, firms make zero economic profit, because if they're earning economic profit, it'll attract new firms, right? We said just the opposite, that when profit's less than zero, right? We said that if profit is less than zero, what's going to happen? Firms are going to exit. Maybe the demand for this product had shifted to the left, or input prices rose or something like that. So now what's happening is I'm not making as much with my resources here as I could over there. So what's going to happen? I'm going to start moving over there. So firms will exit the industry. And of course, when they exit the industry, we said that supply is going to shift left. And if supply shifts left, then what's going to happen is price is going to rise and quantity is going to fall. And that'll happen until economic profit equals zero, if you can get there. So that sometimes this doesn't happen, right? Nobody's making flip phones now, okay? Of course, if all of a sudden, like I said before, it becomes a cool thing to have the flip phone, so the demand shifted to the right, your guys' preferences for flip phones changed, then what would happen is if the demand shifted to the right, prices would rise, firms might make an economic profit, and so we would get firms entering the industry. And we talked about, how there was one company left that made vinyl records and one company left that made cassettes, but no company left making Beanie Babies or whatever, okay? So, and also notice then that we said that profit is a short-run phenomena, because if you're making economic profit, you're going to have new firms enter. So if it's a short-run phenomena, what is that going to tell you? It tells you that the only way that you can maintain economic profit is to keep innovating, right? You have to keep innovating. I like to say that well, first of all, just let's talk a little bit about patents. What does a patent do? A patent is an assignment of a property right, okay? And it says if you are awarded a patent, then it says other people can't use your procedure or can't develop your whatever product you've got. So what does that do? And notice that your Constitution, right, in the United States Constitution, it was written into the Constitution and is there still, right, that you can have patent law. And that Congress can do that. And what does that do? A patent increases the incentive to innovate. Right? Because other firms can't enter that industry, right? And other firms can't be produced what you're producing. Now, of course, you hire patent attorneys, and they'll try to, to say, well, mine isn't exactly like, my product isn't exactly like your product, or and when you take law and economics, we talk about, can you have intellectual property rights? Can you patent a method of creating a gene or something like that? Okay, so what do patents do? Patents increase the incentive to innovate, but they reduce dispersion. If you think about it, because dispersion, I'm going to write dispersion, right? Because I don't have this, firms can't enter for a while, right? For the length of the patent. So there's going to be a trade-off, right? There's an opportunity cost to patents. Patents have a benefit in that they make it so that you have a greater incentive to innovate because you're going to earn economic profit by doing that. But what's the drawback? The drawback is firms can't enter the industry and it doesn't move out. So let's say we're talking about let's say there was let's say you had this virus that came out and it was causing all sorts of problems, and people go, oh wow, it'd be great if we had a vaccine, okay? I now have an incentive to create a vaccine, but if it can't be patented, what will happen? I'm going to take on this expense of creating the vaccine, and there's going to be all sorts of other firms entering the industry, right? So I have less incentive to invent this vaccine, but if you give me a patent, then fewer people are going to be able to get the vaccine because other people can't just go ahead and copy it and start making it and firms entering the industry and shifting the supply curve out. So this is a trade-off between, in a patent law, there's a trade-off between the incentive to innovate and the dispersion of the product. Now, in the Bible it says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? In a market economy, that ain't good enough. You got to do unto others things they don't even know they want done unto them yet. Okay? That's how you get profit, right? I had no idea that I was going to want a cell phone, right? I had absolutely no idea I wanted a cell phone. Again, if you come up to my office, I have a black rotary dial phone, right? That was my phone, okay? And you hated it when people had lots of zeros in their number because you had to keep spinning the dial a lot. But I had a black rotary dial phone. I had absolutely no idea one day I'm going to want a cell phone, right? 20 years from now, you're going to be, when you do your streaming Netflix or something, what's going to happen? You're going to have your television is going to project a hologram out, and you're going to see it all in 3 dimensions, right? Don't think that's not going to happen. Why? Because there's an incentive to take on that risk of innovation. So the profit is a vast contributor to this innovation. And we already talked about the fact that you're wealthier than the wealthiest person 100 years ago, Okay? Why is that? Because we've had innovation. Why do we have innovation? Because of the economic profit. Look around you, just to see and observe. Over the next week, just look around you and see all the things that you use, that you bought or you use or whatever, that didn't exist in 1950. And guess what? You're going to find probably the majority of things that you consume didn't exist in 1950. And if we had gone back prior to the advent of market capitalism, basically when we read How the Rest Grew Rich, if we went back prior to the Industrial Revolution, if we're back in the 1300s, right, that's not going to be the case. Probably whatever thing you're using was in existence 50 years ago, maybe 100 years ago. So it is important to understand the how profit acts to improve the living of everybody. Even if you are in, let's say you're living in Nigeria, okay, probably you're using stuff that got invented somewhere in a market-based economy, right? Or if you're in Democratic Republic of Congo, or you're in Tunisia, or whatever, if you look at what they're using there, probably a lot of what they're using got invented somewhere in a market-based economy. So that's an important thing to sort of think about it, because as you work through the, we're going to have this, I don't know if you heard about it, there's going to be a presidential election coming up in November. Maybe you there's a couple candidates out there. They may have a platform which would deal with profit, or you might hear them talking about profit. Notice that we reduced the corporate income tax in 2017. So what happened? We reduced the corporate income tax. Now, if you take ECON 402, then we would talk a lot more about what the corporate income tax, how it works and what the economic incidence of it. But from our perspective, let's just say that, and of course part of what's going on when we do the corporate income tax, we're going to tax economic profit. So let's say, so we're going to tax economic profit. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, right? Taxing economic profit, for some people would say that's a good thing, right? Because what are we going to do? We're going to be taxing those people who have become wealthy. We're going to be taxing corporations, and then we're going to redistribute it. That's what we're going to do. Well, you can do that, right? And again, in this class, we're not saying you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, but you got to look at what the opportunity cost of doing that is. If you're going to do that, if you're going to tax economic profit, let's just think about what is the result of that. What's the opportunity cost? What's the opportunity cost of taxing economic profit? Well, first thing, right, you're going to distort that. We said that profit has to do with a signal. You're going to distort that signal of where to move resources. Because what did we say? We said, okay, let's say we have a demand curve and we have a supply curve, and we're at some equilibrium. And then what happens is you guys decide you want more of something good, right? Your preferences change. So consumers now have, and let's say there's an increase in tastes or preferences for a good. Okay, we'll call it for, I don't know, some sort of soft drink. Well, then what will happen is that demand curve would shift out to the right, right? That's our story. When the demand curve shifts out to the right, the price goes up. When that price goes up, so we got P going up, that's in the short run, right? So in the longer run, what's going to happen? In the long run, you get firms entering. Okay? And when firms enter, that's going to shift that supply curve to the right. Then what happens? Price falls, Q goes up. So that's what I was talking about in terms of patents, right? There's going to be more dispersion if you allow other firms to enter that industry. So profit acts as this market signal, and if what we do is we tax it, then what's going to happen? If we taxed away the economic profit, suppose we taxed away the economic profit, okay? If I tax away the economic profit, just call that pi again, we'll tax away the economic profit. Why would you enter? Right? You already know how to do what you're doing. You already know how to make this particular product, or you already know how to make this particular breakfast cereal or whatever. Okay? So why would you go out and enter the industry? Because the economic profit's going to be taxed away. That's what's drawing you in. So that it's going to distort that use of profit as a market signal to attract firms into that area where your demand is increasing. Okay? So that's one thing to think about. But two, then, what about innovation? Right? That is, we said that innovation is risk-taking, right? We said that you got to take on a risk to be innovative. And if you're going to tax away my reward for taking on that risk, I'm going to have less risk-taking, so I'm going to have less innovation. Now, you may want to do that anyway, right? You might want to say, gee, I'm going to increase the corporate income tax, or I'm going to increase the tax on people's individual wealth. Okay, I'm going to raise the marginal tax rate for the people who are earning above $100,000 a year or something. You can do that, but notice if you do that, I'm going to reduce the reward for innovating. Right? If you said, hey, if you make more than $200,000 a year, let's take an extreme case. You said anybody that makes over $200,000 a year, we're going to have a marginal tax rate of 100%. That is, we're going to tax the marginal dollar. We're going to take it all away. If we were to do that, then what would happen is you'd get much less innovation. Notice what happened when you reduced the corporate profits tax in 2017. What did you get? You got a big expansion in the economy, right? In fact, in February, prior to the economic shutdown, we had record low unemployment rates. We had GDP, and we'll talk more about that at the end of the semester, but the size of the economy was growing at 4%, which was very, very high. The unemployment rates among minorities was record lows. And so what was a particular explanation for that, or one thing that certainly added to that, was the reduction in the tax on profit. Now, if what we do is we say, okay, I'm running for president and I want to tax profits, and I want to tax people's incomes that are individuals making above a certain amount, well, what's going to happen? I'm going to make it so that the market does not respond as much to improve and changes in your demand if you guys decide you want more of something, and we're going to make it so there's less innovation. Now, you may want to do that anyway, okay? But listen to whoever's running for president and it wants to increase the corporate profits tax and wants to increase the tax on high-income individuals. They don't say, hey, I want to make it so we have less innovation. I want to make it so that consumer demand, the market doesn't respond as much to increases in consumer demand. I want to do that. But we're going to gain redistribution, right? We're going to reduce inequality. And I think that's a good thing, okay? That's not what they're going to say, right? They're going to expect you to what? See but not observe, right? I just keep coming back to that, right? This whole thing's about seeing and observing. And again, if you want to do that, if you want to redistribute income, if you want to make it so that we're going to tax the wealthy, if we're going to tax the economic profit of corporations, you can do that, but you can't ignore what the opportunity costs are of doing that. So what we've now done is we've gone through the basics of ECON 202, enough that you should be able to again answer the 10-point question that isn't, again, told you many times here. Make sure that you've taken a look at the exam number ones. Make sure that you've worked your way through some of those to the extent that you can get together with some other folks and work out the answers. Then that will help all of you, right? Because you're going to have to, it says use demand and supply curves to help you explain, right? So I'm looking for you to explain, to tell me the story. And if you can explain it to somebody that doesn't understand it, that's better for you, right? It's better for them, but it's also better for you. Because the more, if you can explain to your mom and dad, if you're talking to them on the phone, come to visit or something, then if you can explain to them or explain to your brother or sister what a tax on profit does, or explain to them about elasticity, what would happen if you shifted the supply curve to the left, to the extent that you can do that, then you're going to do better at explaining it on the exam. All right. Any questions on this first part of the course here? All right. Okay. Again, if you have any questions about it, you can come into office hours or send me an email or whatever. All right. So now we're going to move. We said, okay, we have a basic understanding of how the economic system works. And again, we talked a little bit about, if you had a monopoly. One of the multiple choice questions says if you have you have one seller that's making economic profit. One of the multiple choice questions say if there's one seller that's making economic profit, what should we expect to happen? And the answer would be we'd expect prices to fall and output to rise, because if you got a single seller making economic profit, firm's going to enter the industry, right? So you now should have at least a fundamental understanding of how the market works and what would happen when government were to intervene in a way, right? And notice the trade-offs that are going to happen. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what political philosophy is consistent with this market-based system, right? So that's what Mises's book is about. So that's what, the book Liberalism is about. What is it about? It's about what's a political philosophy that's consistent with market capitalism. Because the political philosophy of North Korea is not consistent with market capitalism. Or the political philosophy in Cuba is not consistent with market capitalism. Notice what happened in Venezuela. When Venezuela changed their political philosophy, changed how their government was operating, what happened? Then you get all sorts of people fleeing Venezuela, right? Because why? Because the economy collapses. And so what Mises's book is all about is figuring out, okay, what should our political philosophy look like if we're going to have market capitalism? And why do you want market capitalism? And his point is that market capitalism, what does it do? Market capitalism produces the wealth for the poor, right? That is, if we think of market capitalism, it's a system that creates the most wealth for the poor. And again, if you look in your ECON 105 folder, actually I think it's just in the Wolfram folder altogether. Can't remember if it's just in the ECON 105 or it's just sitting out there. You can look at, there are two indices of economic freedom, and you can I just put in some of the old ones and try to put the latest one in there. But you can get on either of these websites to look at. You have the economic freedom of the world. And it's by the Fraser Institute. And the Cato Institute is part of this as well. But then you also have the Index of Economic Freedom, and they both do the same thing, is by the Heritage Foundation. And the Heritage Foundation, and so you have both of these, and what do? They list countries based on how much economic freedom they have. What countries look the most like a market capitalist system and what countries look the least, and they rank them. And if you go through there and it's very interesting just to take a look at what the countries look like. And what you'll find is that those countries that have the highest amount of economic freedom are also the countries where the poor are the wealthiest, okay? And we'll talk more about this a little bit later on, but your intuition ought to be that way, right? If you're going to be the poorest person in the economy, where are you going to pick? You're not going to pick, I want to be the poorest person in Nigeria, and I don't want to be the poorest person in Venezuela, right? Or the poorest person in North Vietnam, okay? Or not North Vietnam, North Korea. Interestingly enough, sort of think about it. If you had fallen asleep in 1968 and you woke up in 2020, you'd think that we won the Vietnam War, right? Because you can get a Marriott in Vietnam, right? There's all sorts of if you get on Google, you can find resorts that you can go to on the Vietnamese coast, right? We didn't win the war. What happened? The markets won the war, right? In the end, that's what happened, right? In the end, what happened is a market-based economy just outcompetes the socialist economy or economy that has central planning in it. And so, if you sort of think through, what we just looked at in this first part, we've been talking about why that would be the case. And so Mises's book is saying, okay, what political system is going to be consistent with this market? And markets are a process. Okay, they're not a place. He talks about markets being a process, right? Which we've just described. That's what when we talk about competitive markets, we're talking about this process that we've just been talking about. Demand and supply, consumers, we made the assumptions of diminishing marginal benefits. By the way, I was thinking about, when we talk about diminishing marginal benefits, we said that the added benefit would keep going down as you got more of something. That's what we assume, right? And there's a line from Mary Poppins that I just thought about. It's a 1964 movie. You must have seen Mary Poppins. But anyway, Mary Poppins has a line that is basically saying marginal benefits could go to zero. Well, she doesn't say it that way. She says, enough is as good as a feast. So if you remember back to Mary Poppins, you know, she says that enough is as good as a feast, which is really saying marginal benefits go to zero. But anyway, as I said before, when you're an economist, you sort of look at things a little bit differently. But anyway, so he's saying that, you know, markets are a process, and we're looking at what this political philosophy is that will lead to the markets, a market-based economy. And why does he want to do that? Because he's concerned about what he calls wealth for the masses. Right? He's saying, okay, what do we want to do? We want to create, I want to create wealth for the masses. What system, what process does that? The market capitalist system as a process does that. What sort of political philosophy should I have to do that? And he's making a plea to return to this philosophy because this philosophy was out there, this political philosophy was out there in the mid and late 1800s. And so he's saying, I want to return to what he calls classical liberalism. Now, the book is called Liberalism because what he's referring to as liberal, if this were 1898, when he was referring to a liberal policy, it would be totally different than what we think of as liberal today. And he complains actually in his book Human Action in particular, but he complains about how the people who believe in central planning, that is the government deciding stuff, have absconded with the term liberal, right? And so that's why there's the introductory chapter, but then in chapter number 1, he goes through, here's what the foundations are of liberalism. This is what he means by liberalism. And he's saying this philosophy used to be the dominant philosophy in the Western world, and that is now, he's seeing it drift away. He's seeing actually that if we had a movement away from the idea of limited government, etc., and he's seeing that move away from that with the rise of fascism in Germany and fascism in Italy and Spain and socialism in Great Britain and progressivism in the United States. And he's seeing a drift away from that. And his book is about, hey, this is going to cause all sorts of problems. Let's go back to this idea of liberalism. In fact, he says, he warns of what he calls the impending collapse of the economic and social system, right? And so he emphasizes that this idea that markets, if we look historically what's happened, and again he's talking about 1927 is when he wrote the book, he's saying if we look at historically what's happened is that markets historically have created economic wealth for the poor. And noticing that even in 1927, if you were poor, market capitalism has made you much wealthier than you would have been even if you were the average person in 1500 or 1700, right before market capitalism came into existence. That is, he says, 1927, the average person, right? The average person could feed themselves, right? Have housing, etc. That was unusual relative to the long history of the world. It wasn't, again, if you look at Monty Python's Holy Grail and how people were living in that era, right? Way less income, way less lower standard of living than it was by when he's writing in 1927. And that, again, when we take a look at how the West grew rich, we're going to talk about that. Why is it that if you look at the feudal period, why did things just sort of sit there for a long period of time? What happened when we sort of moved into the era of trade, we call mercantilism. And then what happened when we moved into the era of market capitalism with the Industrial Revolution. And interesting, on page 3 of the book, he says, whoever does not deliberately close his eyes to the facts must recognize everywhere the signs of an approaching catastrophe in the world economy. Anti-liberalism is heading towards a general collapse of civilization. Okay? Doesn't say, hey, maybe this is going to happen. He says, whoever does not deliberately close his eyes to the facts must recognize everywhere the signs of an approaching catastrophe in the world economy. He's writing this in 1927, right? This is the Roaring Twenties, right? Irving Fisher was one of the sort of the top economists at the time, ended up going bankrupt because he lost everything in the stock market crash of 1928, right? So 28, 29, we get the stock market crash, and then we get what? We get the Great Depression going on. And Mises is basically predicting here the Great Depression, and he says, heading towards a general collapse of civilization. Notice, yeah.
Sorry, where was the quote that you were talking about?
This is in page 3 of the book to start with, in the very beginning of the book. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. So it's at the very beginning of the book. He's announcing, hey, why am I writing this book? Okay. I'm writing this book because I'm not writing this book because I think I'm going to win the Nobel Prize in economics, or I'm going to get this on the New York Times bestseller list, or whatever, right? He's writing this book because he's saying, hokey smokes, Bullwinkle, we're going to have a real problem here, right? It's not that, hey, maybe we're going to have a problem. Whoever does not deliberately close his eyes to the facts. But he's also saying, guess what? It's not going to be a little downturn, right? It's an approaching catastrophe in the world economy, and it's heading towards a general collapse of civilization. Now, what happens in mid-1940s? The United States drops an atomic bomb on civilian populations, drops 2 of them, right? Now, pretty uncivilized thing to do, right? Now, not to say that we shouldn't have done it, because in the absence of doing that, Japan might have gone on and we might have lost millions more lives, okay? So again, it's not to say that we shouldn't have done that, but it's to recognize this is what Mises was talking about. This is certainly a collapse in civilization, what was going on in World War II. So then notice later, right, so this was on, again, page 3, what he said was there's going to be, he's going to what? He forecasts the Great Depression, basically. He also forecasts World War II. And why is he doing that? Because I said before, he's seeing a movement away from classical liberal thought in those market-based economies to a centrally planned state, as I said before. Fascism in Italy, fascism in Spain, fascism in Germany, socialism in Great Britain, progressivism in the United States, this movement towards Franklin Roosevelt's, New Deal and all this other stuff is like all this government interaction and deciding what's going on in the economy. And he's observing that and he said, hey, this is going to create a real problem. Then on page 51, he says it's the fascists that will start World War II, right? He's saying that not only does he say we're going to have World War II, and notice it wasn't called World War I in 1927, right? They weren't going, oh, this is the first of a whole series of world wars we're going to have. World War I, all right, what was it? It was called the Great War, right? Nobody else was saying, oh, we're going to have World War II. But Mises is not only saying we're going to have World War II on page 3 of the book, page 51 of the book, he tells us who's going to start it, right? What is it? Here's a quote. He says that its foreign policy, based as it is on the avowed principle of force in international relations, cannot fail rise to give to an endless series of wars that must destroy all of modern civilization requires no further discussion, right? Let's say, hey, maybe the fascists, this is going to be a problem, right? Maybe the fascists are going to cause a problem. He just says, hey, it's going to lead to an endless series of wars, right, that must destroy all of modern civilization, requires no further discussion, right? It's obvious this is going to happen. How does he do this? And notice what happens. 8 years later, Mussolini invades Ethiopia and World War II is starting, right? And who started it? The fascists did, right? Just like he said. Now, what we mean by fascism is private ownership, government control. Okay, that's what he means by fascism. But it's, again, the focus is on who's making the decisions on things. Fascism is private ownership government control. That is, the government, you own the property, but the government is telling you, here's what you have to do with it, or here's what you can't do with it, etc. Right? And so socialism is where government owns the property. And classical liberalism, what he's talking about, this is a political philosophy that says, hey, we should limit what the government does, right? We're going to have, and we'll talk later on about, a good deal about what he means by fascism. But the point to make here is that he's using this insight about political philosophy and a change in political philosophy that allows him in 1927 to predict the Great Depression when other people are looking at this as the Roaring Twenties going on. He predicts World War II when other people weren't saying World War II was going to happen, that the fascists are going to start World War II, and then later on he explains why they're not going to win. Right? He says later on in the book he says that what's going to happen is the battle of ideas is what's going to determine what happens here. And that it is the winning the battle of ideas that is the important thing. And of course, again, that's why he's writing the book to start with. Now, this what he calls liberalism, which we're going to again work through, but it's basically the idea that that a market-based economy is the way to allocate resources because we want to create wealth for the masses. It's the only system that can do that. And this idea of limited government needs to be limited in order to, and basically to the protection of life, liberty, and property. That's what government its primary role is. So when he talks about that, he says, okay, liberalism doesn't promise happiness. It's not that we're going to be happier. Liberalism doesn't promise happiness. Doesn't say, okay, we're all going to be happier because I've created this political philosophy that leads to market capitalism going on and we're all going to be richer. In fact, he says, here's another quote. He says, happiness and contentment do not depend upon food, clothing, and shelter, but above all, what a man cherishes within himself. Okay? Happiness depends on contentment, right? If we're all, we're all super wealthy, doesn't mean we're all going to be happier. That's not what he's saying. He's saying market capitalism and liberalism will produce wealth for everybody. But maybe we won't be as happy. But if you sort of think about it, if you can feed your kids, if you have a place to live, there's all sorts of things that if you're wealthier, it's probably going to make you a little bit happier, right? Again, diminishing marginal benefits, okay? It may be that after some point you just don't get any happier, unless you're Scrooge McDuck, okay? If you're able to at least have a level of standard of living that you're not worried all the time about where you're where you're going to live and how you're going to take care of your kids and the like, you are likely to be happier. All right, so for Wednesday, we're going to be working our way through liberalism, and we will probably be able to start getting into foundations of liberalism. Again, you want to take a look at the old exams, and that will give you a heads up on what you might be paying closer attention to when when you're looking at the lectures. Okay. Again, as you can see, Professor Butters has been kind enough to record these, and they're on the YouTube video. And normally, he has this new software or something. So it's normally by late afternoon. Yeah.
When is our first exam?
The first exam, if you, again, look at your syllabus, the first exam is the Monday, October 5th of the break. Okay? And don't forget that you're going to have a review session on the Saturday prior to that. So I think that's the 3rd of October, is that Saturday. So again, we might want to, as we get closer to that, we're going to decide what time that we'd like to do that. Do you want to have it in the morning? Do you want to have it in the afternoon? Do you want to have it in the evening? So sort of think through when that might be. And what we'll do is we just go over, sort of summarize what we've been doing, and go over some of the questions, or any questions you might have. I'll answer the questions. Okay? So midterm, the Monday before. Notice on the syllabus we don't have class on that Wednesday, but so basically, the Wednesday before break, let you guys go. It also says on the syllabus that we might have an extra class at the end to make up for that, so you make sure you got your money's worth of tuition. But you get two review sessions for the two midterms and one for the final, so you get 3 extra classes to start with. So we may not decide to do that, but it just sort of depends on where we are. But the bottom line is Monday, the 5th of October, be ready for that. All right? All right. And again, if you have any questions, give me a call, send me an email, come into office hours.